Hi, this is Mike Filipov from PracticeGuitarNow.com. In this video I'm going to show you how to practice guitar licks that combine multiple different guitar techniques in a smooth and clean way. Most of the time when you play guitar licks or guitar solos, you're rarely just playing one technique all the time, such as one arpeggio being played up and down non-stop or one scale sequence being played up and down continuously. Usually it's multiple techniques thrown together, such as a scale sequence together with a legato lick, an arpeggio together with a string skipping lick, and combined with some position shifts. And the challenge is in connecting all these techniques in a smooth way that sounds clean. The way to practice connecting different techniques together is actually quite simple. And I'm going to give you a demonstration with an example on guitar, and then I'm going to summarize exactly what the steps are that you can apply to whatever it is you're practicing. As an example, I will demonstrate practicing connecting this picking pattern with this arpeggio. And they're going to be connected together as one smooth phrase. First, here's a quick demonstration of the phrase played up to speed, and then I will explain exactly how to practice combining the first part of it that uses one technique with the next part of it that uses a different technique in a way that sounds smooth and clean. And you can use these same steps and the same approach to all the licks and solos you practice that combine different techniques. The first step of combining two different techniques together in a lick or solo is to make sure that you can play each part of the phrase that uses each technique individually in isolation first. This sounds very obvious, but make sure to not skip this step. It doesn't matter how fast you can play them at this point. All that matters is that you can play each part of the phrase in isolation perfectly. So in the lick I demonstrated for you, the two parts of the phrase go like this. This is the first part. And this is the second part. The next step of the process is to find the one transition note that separates the use of the first technique in the first part of the phrase from the use of the second technique in the second part of the phrase. The first part of the phrase ends on this G note on the 15th fret of the high E string. It looks like this. After I finished playing, the final note I played was this G note, and this is the last note I played as part of this two-string picking idea, and then I immediately slide into the arpeggio. So we've identified the transition note. We know that in this case it happens to be the G note on the high E string. And now the next step of the process is to practice the final two notes or three notes that happen right before the transition note as part of the first technique being used, then play the transition note, and then immediately play one or two or three notes that happen next as part of the next technique being used. And what this does is force you to concentrate and isolate the very specific notes that most guitar players play really sloppily when they practice connecting techniques together, because these are the notes that most people don't pay attention to, and they just rush through them. And as a result, the final few notes of the first technique, the transition note, and the first few notes of the second technique always sound kind of sloppy and just like a big mess. So by isolating these notes and practicing them with your total focus and concentration, you'll be able to connect the two ideas very smoothly together. Here's what this looks like in the context of the phrase I played for you. The final few notes of the first part of the phrase, the picking portion, sound like this. Again. It doesn't matter exactly how many notes I play here, just as long as it's the final few notes and then the transition note. And then the first few notes of the arpeggio sound like this. Just these three notes played with pull-offs. So now I simply practice that little pattern, consisting of the final few notes of the picking part of the phrase, the transition note, and then the first few notes of the arpeggio. The speed at which you play this little fragment is really not important at first. What's important is that you focus on these critical transition notes that most guitar players take for granted, and as a result their playing always sounds sloppy when they transition between one technique and the next. By isolating that fragment and playing it with your full attention and getting it to be clean and focusing your ear on how it's supposed to sound like, you'll build a foundation that will allow you to then increase your speed and progress into combining techniques as I described in the next step. So after you practice this transition fragment and become more confident with it, the next step is to gradually expand the phrase in both directions. That means instead of playing just a few notes before the transition note, now you play a few more notes before it, and then a few more notes after it, and then a few more notes again, then a few more notes again, until you ultimately are playing the entire phrase, including the transition notes, all the way through smoothly. So that is the basic process to use when you are faced with connecting different techniques in your guitar playing. Again, the summary of the process is to make sure you can play different techniques. You have to practice in isolation first, then you find the transition note, then you find the little isolation fragment that contains just a few notes before the transition note, then the transition note, then the first few notes of the next part of the phrase, and then you gradually expand that little fragment until you're playing the entire phrase. In the meantime, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed the content, hit the thumbs up button below to like the video. If you're not yet a subscriber, subscribe to the channel to get regular updates and notifications of all my future videos about improving your guitar playing. And if you have requests for future videos you want to see on this channel, then go to my Facebook page, like the page, and leave a comment and request a future topic that you want to see explained in a video, and I'll be sure to make a video on it in the future. Have fun practicing, and I'll see you next time.